Hello, my name is Melissa with the city's Readiness Initiative. This video is part of a series of videos about medical countermeasure dispensing and distribution in the Portland, Oregon metro region. In this video, we will cover the basics of medical countermeasures, including what they are, where they come from, and how we might use them in a public health emergency in our region. Medical countermeasures, or MCM, are life-saving medicines and supplies that can be used in a variety of large-scale emergencies, including emerging infectious disease, biological, chemical, radiological, or nuclear threats, or natural disasters. In short, MCM include anything that can be used in support of treatment or prevention to specific populations according to what public health officials recommend. For example, antibiotics can be medical countermeasures when they are used to prevent disease after someone has been exposed to a biological threat, such as anthrax or plague. Vaccines are medical countermeasures because they provide immunity against specific diseases and prevent people from getting sick with those diseases. Antiviral medication is a type of medical countermeasure because it can treat people who are already sick with a disease and help them get better faster. Likewise, antitoxins are medical countermeasures because they can stop toxins from an exposure from building up in a person's body. This helps people recover more quickly after exposure to specific threats like anthrax and botulism. Medical countermeasures also include any supplies or equipment that are needed to support the prevention or treatment of disease, such as gloves and syringes for vaccine administration and ventilators used in hospitals to help people continue to breathe when they are very sick. Another term you'll want to understand is points of dispensing, or PODs. PODs are public health designated sites in the community, such as public schools or other large public venues, that can be set up quickly to dispense medical countermeasures to an affected population. It's important to note that PODs are not used to treat people who are already sick. The goal of PODs is to decrease the number of people who get sick from an exposure. And you should also know that large public PODs aren't always the first choice to dispense some types of medical countermeasures, such as vaccines. Medical countermeasures are used during specific types of public health emergencies. Bioterrorism is one type of emergency where medical countermeasures would be needed. Bioterrorism is an intentional release of toxic biological agents into a population. In a worst-case scenario, such as aerosolized anthrax, potentially the entire population of the affected area would need medical countermeasures, in this case antibiotics, within 48 hours after exposure to prevent disease and death. This is an example where large public PODs would be widely used across the region. Pandemic is another type of emergency that requires medical countermeasures, including many types of personal protective equipment and other supplies. If a vaccine is available in a pandemic, it would be needed for potentially 100% of the population, but over a longer timeline of a few weeks or months. During smaller local outbreaks, such as a meningitis or measles outbreak in a community, the impacted population and timeline to dispense medical countermeasures varies, but MCM would be needed in the form of vaccines or medications, depending on the situation. So that explains what medical countermeasures are and what they do. But where do they come from? Sometimes medical countermeasures are already available through local healthcare providers and pharmacies, but sometimes additional resources are needed during major emergencies. Local public health departments or the state of Oregon may have some medical countermeasures stockpiled, and when those resources are exhausted, the state may be able to request additional assistance from the Strategic National Stockpile, or SNS for short. The SNS is quite literally a federally managed stockpile of medical countermeasures maintained in protected warehouses throughout the United States. The location of these warehouses is not made public. The content of the stockpile is focused on very specific public health threats. A big part of what is available in the stockpile is based on prevention and treatment of Category A agents. Category A agents include anthrax, plague, tularemia, smallpox, botulism, and viral hemorrhagic fevers. The Strategic National Stockpile also contains treatment and supplies for other threats, such as nerve agents and radiological events. It's important to know that the SNS does not stockpile most vaccines, but it does contain medications, supplies, and equipment that might be used in a pandemic, such as syringes, respirators, and ventilators. But due to the widespread impact of a pandemic, the availability of these supplies from the SNS will be much smaller and insufficient to meet the needs of the nation, as we saw at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. Local and state public health officials work together to plan for and exercise for events that will require medical countermeasures so they can be sourced, distributed, and dispensed to the affected populations as quickly as possible. Those are the basics about medical countermeasures. Be sure to check out the other videos in this series on the City's Readiness Initiative website.